Yeah, we're back. We're live, the 10 o'clock block here on a given Monday on the middle way with Chang, Wang and David Larson. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this morning for this important discussion about expert opinions. I'm going to have to ask Chang what he means by that. Are you talking about expert opinions by academics and scholars? Are you talking about expert opinions by lawyers and arbitrators? Give us a handle on the scope of this show.
Good question, Jay. Good to see you, Jay, and Professor Larson. In this mini-series, we invite some top experts from different industries. So we are honored to have Professor David Larson, a top expert in arbitration and dispute resolution, to comment on some current affairs and also share some of his thoughts on arbitration. And in the coming days, we also invite art historians and top executives to share their opinion on international travel and international exchange and collaboration. So today we very much look forward to hear Professor David Larson's opinion. And I understand Professor Larson has traveled to China several times to teach arbitration and alternative dispute resolution. And also, Jay, at the last show, you mentioned the international travel restriction had been put in place by both the United States government and Chinese government, rendered the international travel basically impossible. So we would like to invite Professor Larson just to share some of his thoughts on those topics, arbitration and collaboration.
Well, I guess we have maybe a 6-hour show today, David.
That's a lot to talk about. One thing I did want to mention is that in April, the Biden administration loosened some of the travel restrictions, so it's possible now to get that F1 visa and for students to come for academic programs that start after August 1st. And I think that's hugely important for a variety of reasons. One, I think that the opportunity for the interaction and the cultural exchange is extremely important to the degree that we're going to have any kind of productive relationship. I think a lot of it depends on our ability to create good personal relationships. And that's something that these academic exchanges can do. And some of these people that come to study in the United States will assume leadership positions in China. And to the degree they've created good relationships here, I think that can be productive in the future. I think that's very important. And we can't underestimate the importance of the United States economy. There were about 372,000 Chinese students here in the academic year 2019-2020, which is about 35% of the foreign students in the country. And that's almost twice as many as the second most populated group coming in from India. So it's a substantial number of students, and it brings in a significant amount of revenue for the country and for universities. And estimates are as high as $16 billion in an academic year.
Well, I imagine the universities were lobbying the administration to reopen that channel because it was costing them so much money, especially in the time of COVID. And to their credit, they succeeded, and the administration now has reopened it. One thing I'd like to ask you, though, David, during the time of Trump, we had what I would call, and you may have another term for it, a fragmented foreign policy toward China. What with the tariffs and the insults, what with the on and off again, approach that Donald Trump took. And, I totally agree that students are citizen diplomats. And, we have seen that in other contexts in many ways with China. If you invite a Chinese student to the United States and he goes to school and he rubs shoulders with other students and faculty and administration, by the time he goes back, he is going to be an emissary for the American way. He is going to be an emissary for better relations between the United States and China. So if you take negative steps the way Trump did, I surmise that took a hit. That the the phenomenon that I just described was injured in a way during his administration. Now with Joe Biden, it sounds like that could resume, and it could be very beneficial. It could be a path toward improving relations with China for the long term. Am I right?
That's the dream. That's what we hope is going to happen. When in recent years, law schools have seen a decline in enrollment and a severe impact on law school budgets. And one thing that many law schools have done is they've kind of buttressed their budgets with international students. And not an insignificant number of international students came to American law schools. And when the doors were shut, that really impacted law schools quite heavily. And I know that they will have welcome arms when the students can return. But as to that comment about fragmented policy, I'd say there was no policy. It was just completely ad hoc, depending on how the winds blew. That was the foreign policy we got for that day of that month. I don't think it was very thoughtful and certainly not forward-looking. It was just very reactive, and I think kind of idiosyncratically, emotionally driven by that particular president.
Did it injure the phenomenon I described, that is citizen diplomacy by students?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when you've got your national leader acting in a very undiplomatic way in terms of the language, the accusations, the connection of the pandemic to the Chinese, continually using that phrase that he used, that kind of placed responsibility solely on China. Yeah, of course that's going to hurt that relationship.
Yeah. So we're in a better time now, and that's what this show is about, right, Chang? We are talking about a new dawning, perhaps, under the Joe Biden administration, a new way of dealing with China, new relationships, and new travel. Am I right?
Yes, I hope so. We do hope so. Currently, there are multiple immigration executive orders put in place regarding Chinese travel to the United States. So there are the 14 days travel ban. Anybody has been in China for the past 14 days cannot come to the United States. There was the immigration ban that no Chinese and other citizens from other countries can come to the United States as an immigrant or a work visa, but that one has been revoked by President Biden. But the 14 days China travel ban is still in place and doesn't make any sense because they virtually have no COVID-19 cases in mainland China. And also the United States, the COVID cases in the United States have been declining rapidly. So what happened, Professor Larson mentioned recently, partly because of the university lobbying efforts have been successful. Biden administration announced the State Department embassies would resume student visa processing. But that is not enough. Look at the other areas and all the other people except the students who are going to pay tuition can enter the United States.
We're having some interconnect problems with the Chang side, David. I'd like to examine with you how the campuses have reacted to some of the anti-Chinese experiences we've had on the outside of the campuses. Some of the street attacks in various cities, some of the shootings, if you will. Has that been reflected on the campuses at all?
But yeah, I think that college campuses are very aware of what's happening. And my daughter is president of the Asian American Society at her school. And, they've made some efforts to kind of publicize what's happening, to kind of shine a bright light on it, to make people aware of what's happening, to kind of, if at all possible, to integrate them into the kind of anti-racist movement to not stand by silent. We saw in New York, in a very brutal attack on an older woman in New York, there was a store full of people. And if you recall, that was one of the first heavily publicized attacks. And nobody did anything. Nobody called it in. Nobody called for police. They just watched it. So I think that at least on the campuses I'm familiar with, there is an effort to make people aware of what's happening and to encourage them to respond and take action when they see something happen. It's not always well advised to intervene personally because you may not be equipped to do that and you may end up injuring yourself. But you can certainly call for help. You can gather people and shout it down. There's things you can do without putting yourself at personal risk. But the idea that you're just going to watch and do nothing is very disturbing.
Yeah, especially on a college campus where it's a community of students and, they at least are seeking enlightenment. And so they should shout it down or participate to stop it in some way. And so let's investigate together what the current status of travel is. Because I know, David, you spent a lot of time traveling to China, but COVID has stopped you. And I know a lot of people like that. But it's not only because of COVID. It's because some of the repressive steps that have been taken to academics, to American academics teaching in China has been problematic. And they're reluctant to go back right now. And so I'd like to know, A, what the United States has done to ease it, what China has done to ease it, and whether it's a reasonable experience or expectation for you to go back and other academics to go back now, make trips, participate in the educational process in China.
Two things to talk about. One is shorter trips where you go to make lectures and make presentations, which I don't think are too problematic or too worrisome right now. You're just going to fly over for 2 weeks and make a few presentations. I myself wouldn't be uncomfortable doing that. It's if you're going to come over and be in residence, you're going to stay for an academic year, where you're going to have an opportunity to do a lot of speaking and to get quite informed about what's happening locally. And you might then be tempted or encouraged to talk about what's happening right in front of you because you have firsthand knowledge. That's the situation that I think has people being very cautious that, I'm inclined to talk about what I see and analyze it and observe it and critique it. And I have seen what has happened to some individuals, how they've been censored, and I'm worried about that. I don't know that there's been any kind of, and maybe Chang knows something different than me, but I don't know if there's been any kind of concerted response to that by the United States in terms of trying to get some kind of promise or at least recognition that this is a real disincentive to American scholars and teachers, and that China needs to step back a little bit. I don't know that has happened.
Well, it'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? Chang, what we need is for Joe Biden to try to make it a softer landing for American lawyers too, who go over to China, and so they don't have to worry. So that there's what do you want to call it, a welcoming, where they're not worried about being turned off or having their visas terminated or denied. I can tell you that I know a few who have had that experience because I guess because the Chinese government felt that they were in some way a threat. But we should be able to work out a kind of free speech arrangement, shouldn't we? Why don't we do that? Why doesn't Joe Biden do that? Wouldn't that be better for this citizen diplomacy I was talking about?
I think you're right. The simple solution just to have more communication, more collaboration, and more exchange. I recall one of the top journalists mentioned China should have more foreign journalists in China, and America should have more foreign workers and foreign students in America. It's mutually beneficial. If there are more journalists, foreign journalists and foreigners in China, all of them will not just to focus on the negative things. They will really live in China and study China, not just a peripheral, just a week, quick assignment and get some story out. On the other hand, people will really be there, make friends, understand the culture, and to really do in-depth reporting. On the other hand, in the United States, the more foreign students we have, the more foreign worker we have, the more friends you'll have. And I think if my memory serves me right, Professor Larson, you were invited back to China to teach American law, to promote American-style rule of law, and to keep Chinese faculty and students up to date of the legal development in the United States. You were invited by your former students. Those students came to United States, returned to China, but they still have this very fond memory of American system, and they feel this instant, friendship with Americans. And this is just a no-brainer. And of course, the Biden administration is doing that to have all the students coming back. But you leave the impression that they only want this student to pay out-of-state tuitions. And I hope that is not the impression the foreign student get. And if that is the reason, instead of more high-level, strategic thinking, I think that would not be sustainable.
Well, that's an interesting point. Not only should we, that is the American government, encourage or cause the Chinese government to welcome academics and students for that matter, but we should take steps to welcome Chinese students. We should make the academic community completely international and diversified. And it troubles me. You said there were 300,000 and so Chinese students in the United States. How many American students are in China? And why not? Why aren't they going there? I was involved in a program here in Honolulu that attempted to have lawyers from Hawaii go to China, and it was very hard to get them to go. We should incentivize them somehow. I don't know how. And we should encourage them to go on both sides of the equation. And there should be a lot of Chinese students here. There should be a lot of American students there. Don't you think, David?
Yeah, I think so. I think one kind of disincentive is the fact that, Chinese students are studying English. And even though they may not be fluent when they first come to the United States, they have a chance to improve their English, but they already have a start. Most American students do not study Chinese. They don't have any start. And I think that difference is kind of intimidating to people that, since I don't know any Chinese, I haven't studied any, maybe I won't be able to survive there. You will be able to survive there, but I think the perception is that I may not be able to survive there. And getting back to a point that Chang made a minute ago, that one summer I traveled from Tianjin came into Beijing, lectured in Tianjin, went up to Shanghai, spoke to the River Delta law firm. Then I went over to Wenzhou. And the reason I was able to go to Wenzhou is because one of my former students is on the faculty there. And the likelihood of me ending up in a smaller law school like Wenzhou, just without that kind of connection, it probably would never happen. So having Chinese students come here and then return to China and spread out through different places in the country means that our opportunity to connect with different audiences is really enhanced. And I think my opportunity to go to that school only happened because one of my former students was there.
It wouldn't be that hard for the Chinese government to encourage American students to go over there, and academics, and professors like yourself to have them there, and they would come in good faith, and they would teach and expand the horizons of everybody. It would be valuable, and for a time, I think this was happening, but somewhere along the line, things got colder. Now, Chang, one of the things that we talked about years ago, which you guys are talking about now, is arbitration and mediation of business relationships and disputes. Where does this all fit in terms of this citizen diplomacy we're talking about?
I will leave this to our expert, Professor Larson, to answer.
Okay, yours, David.
Well, one of the advantages of arbitration and the reason why we have the New York Convention, this international treaty for arbitration, is that parties can kind of design the arbitration process with which they're comfortable. And rather than having to litigate in foreign domestic courts, Americans don't want to litigate in China. Chinese nationals don't want to litigate in the United States, and maybe appropriately so. Arbitration lets you construct the dispute resolution process, or you can pick the neutrals, you can set the rules, and it really does. That opportunity really enhances the possibility of all kinds of international exchanges, because you can now say that, okay, there's some risk in doing this, but I'm feel protected on the backside because I've been able to design a dispute resolution process that I understand, that I'm going to be able to access. And so I'm going to go ahead and take the risk. I'm going to go ahead and do it. So I think that the availability of arbitration really opens up all kinds of avenues for cooperation and exchange.
Oh, I totally agree. It's just another form of citizen diplomacy. And you can have the two business communities, the two cultures actually shake hands on that. And it may not be at the governmental level, but it's certainly at the business level, and it can only be good. But my question to you, David, is, arbitration is a matter of contract. Every arbitration proceeding is built around a contract. And you're suggesting that in this case, the contract would be mutually agreeable and mutually attractive to both sides, or has as many sides as there are. But what are the special provisions that should be negotiated into this special, U.S.-China type arbitration agreement that would make it work?
Well, you certainly, and I think in any arbitration agreement, any arbitration situation, you want to make sure you have some ability to select the arbitrator, and that the arbitrator panel that's eligible to hear arbitration is the diversified one. I think that's the starting point. If you don't believe you're going to get an impartial arbitrator, and you don't believe you're going to get a range of opportunities, it's unlikely that someone's going to say that, yeah, I'm going to choose this process. There's the question of enforceability. Well, in most arbitration agreements, you're probably going to need some provision saying that after this award is rendered by this independent arbitrator, I got to do something. I can't enforce it. I can't go seize the property myself. There's got to be some provision for some domestic court recognition and enforcement. So I think that's an important part of it too. Another part, and it's going to depend on the parties, is typically arbitration agreements are not appealable for very many reasons. There's usually very limited appeal. Depending on your circumstances, you may feel it's really important to be able to appeal in a particular kind of situation. And unless you have that opportunity, maybe you don't want to take a risk. So that's I think another important part of an arbitration agreement is to spell out what's the finality of this. Is there any opportunity to even do an arbitral appellate review? And maybe you don't have to go to a court system. Maybe you can structure it with a different panel of maybe 3 arbitrators instead of 1, and maybe that's enough to make you feel more secure about the relationship. So yes, Jay, it's a question of contract, and you do have to be thoughtful about what you believe needs to be in a contract to make you sufficiently comfortable that you're willing to take what might otherwise be viewed as a risk.
One other point on this is if I want to be comfortable, I want to be sure. I mean, either I'm an American or a Chinese, doesn't matter. I want to be sure that politics does not enter into the decision process or any appellate process. Now, with Donald Trump, he would infuse political stresses and demands into pretty much anything. And he could easily muck up, a court proceeding, as he did, or for that matter, an arbitration proceeding. Likewise, Americans arbitrating in China might feel that, if the winds are blowing differently on a given day, that politics would favor, a different result than if politics were not involved. Is there a way? Can you build this arbitration contract to insulate it from politics on either side?
Boy, it's difficult to have any kind of guarantee of that. There is a self-interest in the arbitral institution to be perceived as impartial, because again, this is a voluntary proceeding, and if you've got a history of having politicized decisions, people aren't going to select your institution. So there is some incentive built into the system for institutions to try to be apolitical, or the parties won't come to them. So I guess that's a little bit of laissez-faire economics of kind of regulating the market.
Well, I think it's also a matter of, what do you want to call it, guanxi and leadership and principle, being principled. Over a period of time, I think an arbitrator could establish a reputation on both sides of the Pacific, where people believe that he is a fair, or she, a fair-minded arbitrator, is not going to be influenced by inappropriate considerations. And I think, that takes a few years, and it takes some special individuals, but that's doable, isn't it?
Yeah, and you want to do your due diligence. I mean, a lot of times arbitration decisions, and probably most times, they're confidential. That's one reason why people pick arbitration, because they're not going to be published like court decisions. So it's often hard to find out specifics about arbitration decisions. But sometimes data is kind of anonymized data is collected about cases that you can find. At worst, you can talk to parties and individuals that have appeared before these tribunals, and before certain arbitrators, and ask them, what was your experience? How did it come out? So I think it's incumbent on anybody going into an international arbitration to do some due diligence and find out as much as they can about the prior decisions that are relevant to their own case, and to find out as much as they can about the particular arbitrators that they're considering selecting.
Is it time now to do that, or do we have to wait on some development, some geopolitical changes, some foreign policy relations changes, or should we do it right now?
Well, there's a lot of industries in the United States that are hurting in agriculture and some other areas, where China has been a huge market for them in recent years. So if you ask a lot of companies, they'd say the time is definitely now. We've really been hurt economically with these barriers. We never really understood them. This whole idea that China's going to pay for them, tariffs are paid for by the consumers.
Mm-hmm.
So the United States paid for those tariffs. When you interfere with international trade, and prices will go up. So I think many people would say the time is definitely now. We've got an administration that's more open to international commerce and international trade. We can have a whole discussion about economics and what does a balance of trade deficit mean, and is it really a bad thing? Because, in one sense, it's not as though you're not getting anything. It's not completely one-sided. You're getting something. It's an interesting idea, that this whole discussion about what balance of trade deficits mean. But I think most people, most companies now would say that we've really been waiting with bated breath to start selling and engaging again, and we're ready to do it.
Wow, that's really important, and we should spend more time on other shows on the same issues to rebuild, reknit the relationships, not only at government level, but at business level and individual level. Chang, I wanted to ask you, as a lawyer practicing, what advice you would give to someone who wanted to do business under the protection of an arbitration agreement with China, both sides. A Chinese person, relying on the protection of, say, an arbitration provision that would be implemented in the United States, and an American person who would do business under the protection of an arbitration agreement implemented in China. What would be your advice? It would be complex because you don't know exactly how things. We're still at the frontier on this, I think. So, what would you advise both of these individuals in terms of going into that kind of relationship and enhancing trade that way?
My advice would be go with arbitration because the litigation is costly and also considering the highly politicized legal cases in recent years, you always want to avoid courts. You want to avoid American courts, you want to avoid Chinese courts. And also in the news recently, Chinese Ministry of Commerce have this blocking statute, meaning any Chinese entity and organization being sanctioned by the US government could apply for exemption and also counter sanction measures from the Chinese authority. So the litigation is not desirable. And always my advice to any business want to do international trade or international business transaction would be number one, read Professor Larson's articles and listen to Professor Larson's lectures, and always try to go arbitration. And also this advice can be applied generally. So in terms of US-China citizen diplomacy and also other things, always do arbitration, mediation, negotiation, and no need to go into a nasty fight. And also, time is now. Time is not only for both countries to mutually recognize vaccines, lift the travel restrictions, welcome students, and just be respectful. And that is my sincere hope. I know there are a lot of issues going on there, but my supervisor had once told me, when you do business with anybody else except your family members, you have to assume good intent. If you don't assume good intent, and how can you do business with anybody? If you assume bad intent, sooner or later you'll got into a fight. And so that is my sincere hope that things will improve in the coming days and months.
We have to cover this in great detail. You know, there was so much press about how you do business in China 20 years ago. We have to restart that conversation. We have to get over there. We have to have our academics teach there, our students go there, and we have to do business there. We have to find ways to do it so we're comfortable, so we believe we're safe, and so we can make some money. And we have to have structures like arbitration that will help us do that. We want in on the global evolution. China can teach us and help us a lot. And likewise, of course, we can help them. This could be a new time. But anyway, let's try to talk about that in the future. Thank you very much, Chang Wang. Really appreciate it. And David Larson, Professor David Larson, really appreciate you coming down. Aloha till the next time.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Professor Larson.